Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you might be catching us. I am simply excited that you have joined us for another exciting installment of the Richard Watkins podcast, your podcast committed to lifelong learning, where we have conversations with policymakers and thought leaders all across the country. And today is no exception. Before we go any further, I have to give a huge shout out to the folks who make this possible. The Richard Watkins podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, a premier consulting, research, and engagement firm. If you have questions about how to take a confident step forward where innovation is happening at breakneck speed, visit the Science Policy Action Network at span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get the proceeding. Our guest today is Dr. Juan E. Gilbert. Dr. Juan E. Gilbert is the Andrew Banks Family Preeminence Endowed Professor and Chair of the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Department at the University of Florida, where he leads the Human Experience Research Lab. Dr. Gilbert has research projects in spoken language systems, advanced learning technologies, usability and accessibility, brain computer interfaces, and ethnocomputing. He has published more than 180 articles, given more than 250 talks, and obtained more than $27 million in research funding. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a member of the National Academy of Inventors. In 2012, Dr. Gilbert received a Presidential Award in Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering mentoring from President Barack Obama. He also received the American Association for the Advancement of Science 2014 Mentor Award. Dr. Gilbert received the 2018 Computer Research Association A. Nico Haberman Award. He was recently named one of the 50 most important African Americans in technology. He was also named the 2015 2016 AAAS Lemelson Invention Ambassador, Speech Technology Luminary by Speech Technology Magazine, and a national role model by Minority Access Inc. Dr. Gilbert is also a National Association of the National Research Council of the National Academies, an ACM Distinguished Scientist, and a senior member of the IEEE. Dr. Gilbert was named a Master of Innovation by Black Enterprise Magazine, a modern day technology leader by the Black Engineer of the Year Award Conference, the Pioneer of the Year by the National Society of Black Engineers, and he received the Black Data Processing Association Epsilon Award for Outstanding Technology Contribution. In 2002, Dr. Gilbert was named one of the nation's top African American scholars by Diverse Issues in Higher Education. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert, for joining us today. That was an incredible bio to read. Which one of those accolades and accomplishments stands out to you as the most important?
Well, thank you for having me. And it would be hard to pick, but that is a kind of an old bio. I'm no longer department chair. I would say the honorable thing would have to be the Presidential Award from President Barack Obama. But then also received the National Medal for Technology and Innovation from President Biden. So those two are pretty high up there when the president acknowledges you.
I completely understand. That is really cool. So take us all the way back, right? So how did a young Juan Gilbert become a computer scientist, former chair of the department, and a researcher who is seen by many as being the very top inventor in all of the country? Take us down that pathway, how you became who you are today.
Well, it probably started, and I go back to high school where I took a chemistry course, and I loved chemistry. I was good at it, doing well. So I went to Miami University in Ohio, and because I like chemistry as a chemistry major, and freshman year I took advanced chemistry, not the regular, I took advanced. And I was doing well in there, Richard. And the TA, the graduate assistant for the class, said, Juan, you're good at chemistry. You're going to do well. You're going to graduate. You're going to go to graduate school. And you, I said, wait a minute. Go where? He said, go to graduate school. That's what we do in chemistry. I said, wait a minute. You mean I got to go to school again? I thought I went to college to get a job. And I was the first in my family to go to college. So I didn't know anything about college and let alone graduate school. So I was kind of disappointed by that. And I remember going back to my dorm, and my resident advisor there was graduating, and he was getting a job, and he was going to work at NCR Corporation in Dayton, Ohio. And I said, well, what's your major? He said systems analysis, which is like computer science. And I said, well, I taken one of those courses. I like that. Well, maybe that'd be good for me because I can get a job when I graduate. So, Richard, I changed my major, and I ended up winning a scholarship. And with that scholarship came internship. Coincidentally, it was NCR Corporation there in Dayton, Ohio. And I went that summer, and I'll never forget it. My first day on the job, they said, we want you to work on this, this, this. I said, cool, I got it. And I had it done by, at 1 o'clock. And I was like, I'm done. I'll see y'all tomorrow. They said, no, 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 you got to stay around and look busy. And so I was like, what? Wait a minute. My mom told me you do your chores, and when you're done, you go play. Well, again, I was kind of disappointed. And here we go, going into my junior year, and I had this class called Stochastic Systems. It was required. I hated the course. And I sat in the front first seat because that's what I did all the time. The professor was the dean, Dr. David Haddad. And one day, I would fall asleep in his class. I just didn't like it. One day he said, Juan, I want to see you after class. And I thought, oh man, I'm in trouble. Dr. Haddad is mad at me. This is not going to go well. He pulled me aside, and I would fall asleep in his class, and he liked to hand out stuff. This is days and paper. He had to wake me up to give me the handouts to hand out. And so Dr. Haddad pulled me aside. He said, Juan, I know you don't like my class, but I've been watching you. And over the years, I think you have the potential to be a professor. And I said, wait a minute, because I fall asleep in class. He said, no, 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 no. I know you don't like my class, but I think you could do it. And you know what? If you got your PhD, I hire you. So I went and looked to see what, professors and these PhDs did. And I found out that, they do research, which I enjoy, and they get stuff done. And when they're done, they could go play. And I thought, oh man, that's cool. But one thing stood in the way, that graduate school thing again. So, long story short, I ended up going to work at NCR Corporation in Dayton, Ohio when I graduated. I went to school at night at the University of Cincinnati and got a master's degree. Finished my master's degree and started my PhD, and finished my PhD in the year 2000. And I went on the market, and I started my academic career. By the way, when I was finishing my PhD, the last year, Dr. Haddad hired me as a visiting professor. So it's full circle. So I finished it and got hired at Auburn University in Alabama. Started my career there, did very well. I was there 9 years. And in my ninth year, Clemson University came knocking, and they created a new school of computing, and they wanted me to come lead a division called Human Centered Computing. And it was like, wow, this is a great opportunity. So I took it. Moved to Clemson in 2009. I was there 5 years. Richard, I was living my life. It was wonderful. I had grown the department. We became the number one producer of black PhDs in computer science. We had the most black faculty. We had five black faculty. No other computer science department in the nation had anywhere near that. So it was great. And then October of the year 2013, I got a call on my cell phone, weird number from Florida. I answered it. It was the dean of the College of Engineering here, Dr. Cami Abernathy. She said, Juan, University of Florida has a new initiative. We're trying to become a top 10 public university. And you've been identified as a preeminent candidate to come help us move. would you be interested in coming to Florida? I said, no, I'm living my best life. I'm not going anywhere. Um, so she said, well, why don't you come give a talk? And I knew some people here. I said, I'll come give a talk. So I went down, gave a talk. And at dinner that evening, Dr. Abernathy said, so Juan, what would it take to move you? I said, it take the world to move me. And she said, well, I think we got it. I said, you talk to me that way? Okay. I want this. She said, yes, 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 yes. And it was one no. You know what the no was? I asked for a box in the football stadium.
Oh, the swamp.
Yeah, now that sounds weird, right? But I had a box at Clemson. I had my own box. And she said, well, I can't give you a box. I'll give you everything else. So I came back, talked to my faculty and everyone. And in February of 2014, they flew 5 faculty members down, and my wife and I, and I'll never forget it, it's Valentine's Day. We flew out, and in 2014, some people actually may remember this. If you're in the South, that was an ice storm that hit the South, the Southeast. We were the last plane allowed to leave. We flew into Gainesville and it was sunny and the birds were chirping. And we said, maybe this is a sign. So we interviewed and March came. I went back and told my lab about it and they canceled their spring break plans. My graduate students drove to Gainesville, interviewed the dean, and then they came back. So long story short, Richard, 5 faculty, 2 postdocs, and 20 PhD students moved to Florida. It was a gigantic thing, big news story. And that's how I came to where I am. And that's my story. And we've done a lot of things along the way, but that's how I got here.
I feel like that's also kind of a story about the difference between ACC football and SEC football. Perhaps that might be a thing. And it's funny because I think that I was caught up in that snowstorm too, because I think I was in, if memory serves me correct, I get the years confused. I was at a conference in Houston and I was trying to get back to North Carolina and
No,
my flight was grounded. So
no, you weren't
you
going to get there. And it probably was that year because it very rarely does a snowstorm hit the southeast and goes all the way from Texas through Florida, Georgia. I mean, it hit everywhere. Northern Florida, it was the biggest in history, so it was a big deal.
Again, we're here with computer science, Dr. Juan E. Gilbert. So, in reading the bio, one of the things that jumped out to me, in addition for it being outdated, was the aspect of brain-computer interfaces. I remember when you came to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and you gave a talk. During that talk, you were talking about how you were allowing students to control drones through uh, I don't want to misrepresent, but basically with their mind. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind. And then that was maybe a decade ago. Where has that research gone since then?
Yeah, so my lab held the world's first brain drone race. People thought it was fake, and there's no way you could do that. And I bring them and we actually show them how it works. But this is how it works. We put a computer or laptop in front of you, and we put this brain computer interface on your head. And we would tell you to think about pushing something, a chair or a lawnmower, whatever, just whatever. And they would think about pushing. We had this cube that was floating in the screen. And what we would do is measure their thought for pushing. And as it got intensified, we pushed the cube further. And we learn your pattern for pushing in that context. And then we take that pattern and we apply it instead of the cube, we apply it to a drone. And we bring the drone up and you push it. And the more you concentrate, the faster it would go. So we were able to do a brain drone race using this particular approach. Today, my students who are working on it are professors, and a couple of them, I think either this weekend or last weekend at Morgan State University, they're holding a brain drone race. So we're still doing this kind of technology, and we have some new innovations that I can't share right now that are on the BCI. But yeah, we're still doing it, and that was the world's first brain drone race in 2017 or so.
That's really, really incredible. When people think about, and you're standing at the bleeding edge of a lot of these technologies, when people think about the technologies and brain human interfaces, you have on one end technology that is controlled by human thought. And then you have on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, technology that doesn't necessarily have to interact with the human at all. And in the middle, you have the human that is enhanced by technology. And I'm probably leaving out something, but as far as this spectrum is concerned, where do you see the fastest growth happening, right? So you've got people controlling technology with their minds, technology enhancing human physiology and perhaps human thought, and then you have technology interacting with itself. Being at the bleeding edge, what do you think is the fastest growing area of the field?
Well, first, I forgot to mention if people who are listening, go to braindronerace.com and watch a video. You'll see it and you can see it for yourself. To answer your question right now, that's a good question. I think everyone's been touched by AI and the impact it's having. I think that right now is the biggest technology that's impacting. It goes both ways. We're feeding AI, and AI is using that, which we're using in all kinds of contexts. I think there's some implications for that. Um, yeah, I think it goes both ways right now, where AI is the big thing. And probably, I'll give you an example of what I mean by that, that people aren't really thinking about, but is real. Um, we have software that we wrote, wow, back in 2003, I wrote the first version of it, dealing with emissions and hiring, and it's a form of AI. Um, but I'm not focusing on that. But the reason I'm telling you this is because in college admissions, for example, the admissions officers have a struggle right now. You and I, Richard, we came through an era where we had to write an essay or something for admissions like, and scholarships and things. That still exists, but the problem they're having is people are using AI to generate them. And human beings can't distinguish an AI generated one from a human one. This is a problem. And that's easy to understand. But here's the bigger problem that comes out of this. So everybody understands what I just said. That's an easy thing to comprehend. Here's the more complicated long-term effect of this. There are generations who are using AI to generate essays and other things. Richard, you and I had to learn how to write. This is creating a generation that doesn't write well. What's going to happen if they actually have to write? So that's something for researchers, future researchers out there. Take a look at this problem. What's the impact AI having on literacy? And that's a serious thing that I think needs to be investigated. So to answer your original question, AI is impacting us and we're feeding it and using it, and it's happening in ways that, hey, we don't anticipate, but there's research to be done to look at these things.
Yeah, what? And if I were to ask this, like, what would happen when someone has to write again and they didn't pick up any of the skills? But one of the more interesting questions, well, I don't want to say more interesting, is this: what if they never have to write again? Right? On one end, the question is, well, what if they do have to? Another end is, what if they don't have to? And that's a conversation in which my imagination cannot come up with what that scenario looks like. Because like what you said,
We may be headed that direction where they don't have to write. Um, they have to converse though. AI hasn't replaced that at the moment, but you're right. That's a consideration. But again, you and I have just elaborated for anyone out there listening of research direction. If you're looking for a research project, here's a serious one that you could take a look at. These are real things. These are happening. So yeah, I don't have a direct answer to your question. I think it's a there is a scenario where they don't have to write again. There's a scenario.
So I guess another question again. First of all, I had all of these questions that I wanted to ask, and I knew that even though I took, you know, great effort to create, I was like, by the time the interview happens, the conversation is going to go a lot of different directions. But what does that mean for an educator? What should educators think about when educating children, young adults, while holding in the back of their head, they don't know what's happening around the corner?
Well, Richard, that's a wonderful question. I have an answer for you. It's weird to say this, but they're using the AI too. They are generating course content and things using AI. And there's articles about this already. People are looking at the impact of AI with, for example, college professors, and there's scrutiny and asking about these things right now. So it works on both sides. Content is being generated by teachers, faculty, etc. And on the other side, students are generating content as well. So it's changing how we teach and learn. And I don't know the impact of that. I think your question is a bigger question. It's more futuristic. Can we see ourselves heading to a point in society where we don't have to write anymore? Think about this. We could go back decades and there was a generation that were using typewriters. And they may have been asking, can you see a point where we don't have a typewriter? I mean, we communicate with, and you could even before that, what was it? Pen and paper, handwriting. Remember cursive? How many people can write in cursive? Uh,
Just thinking about cursive. I was just thinking about cursive.
Yeah, that's a good example too. So we had these transitions. Is AI the new uh, literary approach where we had cursive and typewriters and all these stages we went through? I I don't have the answer to that, but I think you pose a very good question. And again, for people listening, these are opportunities for you to dive into these things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. As far as, I mean, there's just so many questions just about artificial intelligence, but I want to kind of ask kind of another question going back to the human machine interface. And I don't even know if I'm using the correct term. I'm going to use the term brain computer interface. When you have that interface, is there any, and maybe we're too early on to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What happens? Is there a scenario where, you know, large language models have an interface with the biological mind? When we're talking about brain computer interfaces, what happens when the brain and artificial intelligence comes together? That, yeah, what is that a possibility? What does that look like?
That's not my area of research, and I don't believe that's happening. The things we were doing with brain computer interface is strictly reading electrical activity from the brain and patterns of consistent thoughts. That's what we were doing. There's no way for us to go the other way, meaning using a device to put stuff in the brain. Um, so we couldn't do that. I think that will require some kind of surgical implantation or something, and we don't, we're far from that in my lab. The only other way to do what you're saying is almost for it sounds weird, but a hypnosis kind of thing, or putting imagery in front of people to implant certain things in the brain. That stuff's been studied for a very long time, but I don't know that we can insert AI into the brain. And that's something that we're not looking at. When you mention human machine interface or human computer interface, that's a big discipline that looks at a human computer interaction, how to design interfaces and things so that humans can use them to accomplish a certain goal in a certain context. So that's something we specialize in. And we actually changed the term. We started referring to as human-centered computing. And what we do in HCC, and we have a PhD degree in human-centered computing here at Florida. We created one at Clemson. The idea is that these individuals who are pursuing these degrees will understand not only computing, but they'll understand humans and the human condition in certain contexts and how to put them things together to accomplish goals and work collaboratively.
Thank you so much for that. And forgive me if the things that I'm asking are far-fetched and sound like they come from science fiction, but it feels like in our present day, the state of affairs seems like it came from science fiction 20 years ago. And so I apologize for that. And
No,
forgive my
Richard,
ignorance.
don't apologize for that. I'm proud that you said that. I mean, we say that my lab, we changed the name. We're computing for social good now. That's the name of my lab. And what do we work on? We work on innovative solutions to real world or applied problems. And we do that by integrating people with policy, technology, and things like that. So for people to say that we're at the cutting edge or we're futuristic and things like that, that's a compliment to us. We take it as a compliment if people say you can't do that. That's a compliment to us. So thank you.
Oh, no, no, no. Thank you so much for that. And when I heard you speak, I also heard you speak at AAAS, and you were talking about your work in college admissions, but also you were having a conversation about hanging chads and voting technology. Are you still doing work on voting technology? And if so, or if not, how do you feel about the current state of voting technology?
Yes, we're still working in that space. Back in 2002, we created an open source voting technology called Prime 3, Premier Third Generation Voting Technology, where first generation was writing on paper, second generation was those, punch things, and third generation is using a computing device to generate a ballot. We invented that. And so we made voting more accessible for people with disabilities, and we're still working in that space. We have a new technology called the Transparent Voting Machine. You can go to transparentvotingmachine.com and look at what we're doing in that space. The idea is we're turning paper into a touchscreen using technology. And we did that to address allegations of vote flipping and people not noticing. We also have this new innovation, so keep an eye out for this thing. Remember this word, televoting. We created this thing called televoting. It's a form of internet voting, and as that takes off, what people have to understand when we create these innovations, it doesn't just happen overnight. And people will say, "Well, that was an overnight thing." And no, we've been working on this for a very long time. So I have to remind people that we created these things and to remember. So televoting is our latest innovation. So to answer your question, yes, we are very much active in that voting space. We created something called Voter Pass. So in the last couple of election cycles, presidential elections, wow, was one of the big things we had to deal with? Long lines. Well, we felt bad about that, and we created this thing called Voter Pass. What is Voter Pass? Imagine if you want to go vote, and you could use an app or your phone to reserve a time to vote. You show up, and there's a separate line for people with the voter pass, and you go straight there. Sounds familiar because Disney Fast Pass,
I was
Universal
just about to
Express.
say that sounds just like Fast Pass.
Yeah, and that's a similar approach. Uh, we have a method on accomplishing this. Now, election officials, to be honest with you, they're not very fond of this. And I'll tell you why, Richard. Sounds like it's obvious, right? Why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you want that? People don't have to stand in line. Everybody could just go and at their time and vote. In order to accomplish this, Richard, we have to develop a model. This model is based on the number of voting stations they have and approximate time it takes to vote. Well, when you do that, it turns out you can actually estimate the full capacity of voting at that place. So what I'm listening to what I'm saying, we would know the limit, the maximum number of voters you could possibly serve. What happens if your number of registered voters is like three times that? So a lot of people don't want to know this information. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But voter pass, remember that word? That's something we invented, and televoting and the transparent voting machine.
Next question, and any of these topics, I can ask 100 questions about it. And I think that's the curse of being a podcaster. And I'm new to this whole podcast world. We're just past episode 50, but I get why so many people do it. One of the questions that I have is about how do you come up with your next research question, right? One of the things that you said earlier is you recognize a problem and then you try to put forth solutions. How do you recognize that problem? I mean, how do you go? Because there could be, I mean, countless things that you could be, looking at. How do you find, all right, this is what I'm going to look into?
Well, I get asked that a lot. And to be honest with you, a lot of the problems we work on, they come out of social or societal need, news media, or just what people are feeling. So we identify a problem, and how do we come up with solutions? Well, it's an interesting story uh, for me. In some ways, I was a unicorn. Um, and Richard, you know this. You know the circles I keep. I hung out with a bunch of people in the social sciences, education, etc. There were no African Americans in computer science, so that was my circle. And so hanging out with all those people in these other disciplines shaped who I am. It shaped my method of thinking. So I developed a different way of thinking than my peers in computer science. So you put a problem in front of me and 100 other computer scientists, I'll be the unicorn. I'm the one who comes up with these weird ways of seeing things because of the circles I kept, because of where I came from. So I think differently. And I used to think that was a disadvantage. In grad school, it was weird. I persevered and made it through. But it turned out to be a blessing and an advantage on the other end because now I see the world differently. And that gave us an advantage over my peers. Like the way we create these voting machines, they would have never thought about these things. Never. But here's the thing, and I had to teach my students this. They have to understand when we create things, we put them in front of people and they do this. What's the big deal? Duh, that's obvious. Everybody can do that. And I have to explain to my students that's our job. Our job is to design solutions to problems that are so transparent and easy to use that they actually think they could have done it. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Because the idea they would have never come up with these things on their own. Give them a blank piece of paper and say solve it. They can't do it. But then you show them the solution. It's obvious. Why would yeah? And that's our goal. Create those kind of innovations. So we've been successful at this. Sometimes it's painful, but I think to answer your question, I think the way we come up with these things is because of the circles I was in, and there weren't many computer scientists in there.
Yeah, that's a huge plug for folks out there. If you're thinking about becoming a scientist, go ahead and do it. Do that. Computer science or any other discipline of science. Just there's a lot of problems out there, and use your imagination to come up with solutions. I think that's a fantastic plug for becoming a scientist. Talking about the work that your lab does, we've covered, brain computer interface, voting, admissions. What area of research is your lab doing that's the hottest? that we haven't discussed? What are some areas that you were focusing on now, or some areas that you would like to focus on?
Well, right now we're in the AI world. We're just starting some new things there, trying to figure out our pathway. So I don't have anything concrete in there right now. I think at this point in time, we're heavily focused on the voting side, in particular, this televoting project. In fact, the United States Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, they have a group of commissioners and they're coming to visit our lab to see what we're doing. So we're having impact at the highest levels in the country. So I think that's a major focus. I think we may go back and do some work. It's come up to do some more learning technologies, how to teach people things. Um, so we'll see how that plays out. I would say at the moment we're finding and defining, we're in a defining phase and pursuing the next thing we're going to look at.
Now, when you are looking at, voting technologies, I heard in one of your talks, you're looking at other states. What state, and I know states have the ability to control their own kind of election process. So state by state, it is different. Do you have an opportunity to work with other states' board of elections, or are you strictly focused on Florida elections?
Actually, neither one. I am not a voting technology or voting machine vendor. And it's hard for people to understand that, in particular, voting machine manufacturers. It took years for them to understand that because they thought I may be competition to them. I'm not, I don't have a company in voting machines, and that's not what we do. What we do is innovate and investigate and report, and we translate that so voting machine manufacturers and others can use that technology. Again, I'll give you an example. ES&S is the nation's largest voting machine manufacturer. And I think Dominion may be close to catching them and passing them. But ES&S created a accessible voting technology that was modeled after our Prime 3 system. We actually did the accessibility review of that years ago. Um, and it was called the Express Vote. But the reason I bring that up is to show that, yeah, we created Prime 3, had the first version of it in 2003. We were a decade ahead of all these people. And but again, I didn't create a voting machine company or anything like that. We didn't do that. We're trying to solve problems. And again, it takes time for these things to get adopted, translated, and put into practice. So, if you go vote and your voting machine, you mark the ballot and it prints a paper ballot, that's the innovation we were doing before any of them. And so I like to say that a lot of the things that are coming to the market are things that we did first. And people don't really know it, but we're changing voting. We are changing voting in this country.
That's absolutely incredible. And listen, if you check this out, then you'll know it from checking out this podcast. Which brings us to something that we do every single podcast. As a podcast host, the Richard Watkins podcast specifically, I have the honor and privilege, and also the curse of talking to the greatest minds in the country. And what always happens is at the end of the episode, I end up kicking myself because I should have asked this. I should have asked that. You may have been preparing yourself to deal with this set of questions that you never received. So I have this question that I ask every one of my guests, and I'll ask it to you now. What question should I have asked? And then go ahead and provide an answer.
Uh, good point. I think you hit everything because we hit all the projects in the lab. We hit where I came from, what I'm doing. Um, we hit on what's next. Um, I can't think of any. I think you hit all the things um, that I could think of. I can't think of anything that you may have missed. So good job.
I appreciate that. I will tell you that I am prepared because the last expert that we had was a mental health service provider.
Mhm.
So I want to ask this, and I know this might not be something that your lab focuses on, but someone who is really pushing the field forward and pushing society forward. I want to ask this. How do you think people or the human condition is changing because of technology? I mean, how is mental health changing? We talked about how people may not write anymore. How is this shaping society and the human condition, the work that you're doing? And we'll have that as the final question.
Well, we talked about it a little bit, like AI is impacting society, and like your question of whether or not we'll ever have to write again. Um, there's so much in that question is loaded because from our perspective, we feel that the work we're doing could be changing, like I say, changing voting, the way we interact and vote. Um, I think there's things that we're doing that could have all the stuff we work on have societal impacts. It's just a matter of scale, how far it reaches. At a broader perspective of your question, I don't have the exact answer, but I know it is changing. Meaning technology is changing how we work, how we think, how we view things and operate. Technology has changed how we interact with each other. You go visit someone who's in their 70s or 80s, and they think it's really weird that you could sit next to someone and text them. So that in itself tells you, Richard, that technology has changed society and our interactions, and it's still doing these things. Um, so if there are people out there who are, lovers of technology and sociology, wow, you have fertile ground to work on. There's all kinds of things you could investigate at the heart of that question. So I guess in some ways I'm punting your question because I think it's too broad to answer. There's just so many things that, in particular from my field, that are changing and changing society. Some of them are very obvious, but I think some are salient and people aren't even looking at. And we talked about one that's salient, and I think that needs to be investigated. AI's impact on writing and AI's impact on education. So those are things that we can take a deeper look into.
We should have talked. I asked the wrong question. We should have talked about play calling utilizing artificial intelligence because with that reference to punting, that makes two football
Yeah.
references today. And we should have talked about football because I'm imagining, and nobody has talked about this that I have heard, especially in a sport like football, where it's so much analytics, so much game plan, so much play sheet and play calling, that there have to be, especially at the top collegiate level or at the professional football level, there has to be game plans that are currently being designed by large language models. Like I would not be surprised, and so we should have perhaps dove into that a little bit because I think technology and artificial intelligence will change what happens on the gridiron, and I haven't heard anybody talk about that yet. So, yes, yes, yes. So. Dr. Juan Gilbert, again, the Andrew Banks Family Preeminence Endowed Professor in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering at the University of Florida. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And for each and every one of you out there, be sure to check out all of our other episodes. You can check us out on Facebook, Science Policy Action Network, Inc. And remember this, that the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. And until next time, take care.